Hi, Mark. Welcome to Property Leaders. Thank you
Hi,
for coming
Tim. Oh,
on.
it's my pleasure. How you doing?
Very good. Very, very good. Thank you. So let's jump straight into it. So the first question, our signature question that we always ask our guests is, what do you think your definition of a leader is, Mark?
Um, I suppose in terms of what a good leader is, there's various skills you need. The main one I would say is communication skills. I think it's really important when you're in a position of authority to be a good communicator, and that's both internally and externally. The internal message is really important when you're
Mm.
communicating to your team, to your staff, if that makes sense.
Is that something that you say that you naturally sort of had as a youngster, or was it something that you've learned as a skill, communication?
I think it's probably something I've learnt, to be honest. I've always enjoyed reading. I'm not sure I've always enjoyed communicating necessarily, but certainly I've loved,
Yeah.
yeah, reading, loved, and, movies, anything that really is about communication,
Mm.
music as well. But no, I'd say it's not something that comes hugely naturally to me. It's something that I have learnt and have to think about, and have had some training in over the years as well, which has been beneficial.
Is it so, Mark? Going and talk about that. Would you say you're an introvert or an extrovert?
I would say I'm an introvert, um,
Okay.
but I've had to deal with that in terms of what I now need to do as part of my role. On occasion, I have to stand up in front of a few hundred people and talk, which is, as you can imagine, you may have done. It's
Mm.
quite a bizarre experience, and not something I've necessarily enjoyed hugely. But having done it a few times now, I enjoy it a bit more. I'd say. Still get very nervous,
Mm.
and from my perspective, it's all about preparation. If I feel I'm fully prepared for whatever I'm going to do, then I'm more relaxed, and I think probably come across as a better communicator when I do that.
Do you think, Mark? So it's interesting to talk about introverts and leaders who are introverts. Do you think there's a more successful type of leader, whether you're a kind of, you're a deep thinker and quite quiet person, or whether you're an extrovert and, you're really kind of like you want to be, with people all the time and kind of a little bit of a center of attention? Do you think there's a certain type that makes a better leader?
Um, I think I think a good leader is someone who is likable. I don't buy into the idea that some leaders that they're not particularly pleasant people necessarily. They might be very successful businessmen, but I don't think that
Mm.
makes them good leaders.
Mm.
So I think being likable, being approachable as well,
Mm.
and visible as well. You don't want leaders in their ivory tower. You want people that are available and people who you can approach and speak to. Um, it's that ability to inspire people and to take them on your journey. And I don't think you're going to do that if they're not buying into it, and they need to buy into you as well.
Mm. Is there any particular for sort of leaders, sort of younger sort of professionals who are just starting to build their own teams out? Would there be any tips that you would be able to give those people of how to get people to buy into the vision of the company or the culture and you as a person as well?
Um, I suppose what you want to do is you can't take people on that journey until you know what that journey is, or at least what the destination is. So you need to understand what your vision is, be very clear on that, your strategy.
Mm.
And once you have clarity on that, then you can work out how you want to get there. And once you've worked that out, then you can communicate that to your team, your firm, and look to take them along on that journey.
How do you, so let's go back to, so for people obviously, Mark, that aren't aware of who you are, can you tell us a bit about obviously what your role is within your organization? And then let's look back to the start and how you got involved in property. Because I know you've been at the company for a good amount of time.
I have. So I'm first and foremost a solicitor. I am a commercial property lawyer. My specialism is in development, but I cover other areas as well. I joined Leicester Aldridge as a trainee solicitor in 2000, straight out of law school. I became a partner in 2007, and I became the head of the real estate group last year in November. I run a small team directly where we act for house builders, other developers, helping them to acquire sites for development. We act for local businesses as well, and national businesses too, helping them move their offices or with their operational premises.
Excellent. So did you know from a young age that you wanted to be a solicitor? When did you decide that you wanted to, and when did that career path go down? How did you decide that career path?
It's slightly, yeah. A lot of people say, it was from watching Ally McBeal or LA Law or something like that. But from my perspective, it was choosing my A levels, and I was intent on doing physics, and then I got cold feet and realised it was actually going to be pretty hard work, and I wasn't as good at it as I thought I was.
Yeah.
And one of my friends, who was a year older than me, was doing a law A level, and said how much he was enjoying it. So I thought, yeah, that sounds interesting. Let's go for it. And and never look back. Really, I found it really engaging. A level, by far my favourite subject when I was at college, and haven't looked back really.
What was it particularly that you enjoyed about law once you got stuck into it?
I just found it really interesting. There's so many aspects to it. Obviously, there's the sexy side, if you like, sort of the criminal cases, and it's really intriguing, and it's the sort of thing you can associate with from movies and TV and everything. But it was also some of the tort cases, contract cases that really took my interest and thought that's something I can get involved in. I think that also the way I learned was in quite a structured way, and I think it suited me quite well in terms of my mindset and how I approached my studies.
How did you? So once you came out of uni, and as you said, you went straight into the training program at Leicester Aldridge. Did you Did you take any time off, or you literally just went straight into that, or did you take a break at all?
I took some time off before uni. I took a year off to make a bit of money, and I didn't feel quite ready to go to uni when I came out of college. But once I'd gone through uni, so I did a law degree. Then I went to law school for an academic year, and then started straight from there. I did a bit of travelling in the summer holidays, but apart from that, it was straight in without a break.
Straight in.
Yeah.
And is that if someone listening out was thinking of going into law and into property, would you advise to go straight into it? Would you advise to take the route that you did and go into a trainee kind of graduate program?
I'd say yes, definitely go into a graduate program and look to become a trainee solicitor. In terms of whether or not it's a law degree, I think it's horses for courses really, and it's important that students should do a degree that interests them. So it doesn't have to be law. It's very easy to do a conversion course afterwards, and it's a very popular route for lawyers to do a different degree. History is very popular for some reason. And then do a degree conversion after that. So if you are interested in property, then as you know, there's some really good sort of property-based degrees that could lead to a career in the law and give someone a real advantage.
When did you Mark, when you got started at Leicester Aldridge, did you start working within the property sector straight away, and it's something that you just climbed up that ladder, or when did you get into property?
No, so it wasn't straight away. So
how did that come about?
When we joined, we were told, so when you're a trainee solicitor, you do four seats, each of them 6 months long, and so it's a 2-year training program. And certainly for the first couple, you're essentially told where to go, and it's where the business
Yeah.
need is within the firm. So I started within the private client group, preparing wills and dealing with probate, which I found very dry, to be honest. It wasn't for me, but it was quite a good introduction to the law and the firm. And then I was told I was going to the commercial property team, which I didn't want, I'll be honest.
Okay. Why did you not want that?
Well, when you study property at university, it's really dry. And I found it pretty dull, to be honest. I really didn't engage with it. When you get to law school, the property modules are a lot more practical. So you get more of a feel for the work and the sorts of transactions you might get involved in. And I enjoyed that side of it. But the underlying, some of the legal principles around trusts and other bits, I found quite unpalatable. So when I was told that's where I was going, I wasn't particularly happy, to be honest. But once I was in it, I absolutely loved it, because then you realise when you're involved in these transactions, it's not really about the law. It's the law is really important, but it's more about facilitating a transaction. So being part of that journey with the client, I found really, really interesting and exciting as well. So having finished those 6 months, I then moved on to a litigation team. So I did banking and finance litigation for 6 months. It was interesting, but again, I knew it wasn't for me. I remember one time when I had to represent a motor finance company in court and cross-examine someone, and it was pretty terrifying. And I realised, that definitely wasn't for me. And then I went back into the property team for my 4th seat, and was offered a place on qualification.
Excellent. And what part of it was the most interesting part for you in working in the property sector and getting involved there? Was it the problem solving of the structuring of deals and trying to solve the problems that come with getting those deals over the line?
That definitely played a part. Yes. So when I first qualified, a lot of the work I was doing was acting for property investors. I was helping healthcare companies that were acquiring or selling property portfolios. And I found them interesting clients, and I liked to get involved in the problems that they had, whether they were legal or not, but more often than not, the law played a part in their decision-making process. So that ability from a relatively early age to sort of immerse myself in a client's business was really useful. At the time, we probably had 3 or 4 main clients, which really gave me an opportunity to get under the bonnet and really understand what made the clients tick and their businesses tick. And that was really important experience.
Could you give us some examples, Mark, of a typical case that you would take on for maybe a house builder? Or is there no such thing as a typical case for a house builder when they're trying to structure a deal? Because I know these things can be very complex.
They can. I'm not sure there is a typical one. If you'd asked me a few years ago, I might have said that there was certainly sort of in the heyday a few years ago where there was a few sort of more standard transactions, but no, I wouldn't say there's necessarily a standard one now. But so a lot of the work we do is acting for house builders when they acquire lands. They tend to go down a few different routes. There's a lot of option agreements at the moment. We're doing more and more land promotion agreements as well, which is slightly different, as it's the promoter themselves doesn't normally acquire the land. It's more promoting it through the planning process and then taking a share in the profits when the site is sold, once it's either allocated or planning's granted. But certainly 8 to 10 years ago, the contract that we were dealing with the majority of the time was a conditional contract where completion was conditional on planning permission being granted and that planning being satisfactory to the developer. And that still makes up a fair amount of our work, but certainly option agreements are fairly prevalent at the moment.
Why do you think for the house builders that they're going for option agreements now? Why do you think that market's changed slightly?
Well, I mean, certainly, as you know, an option agreement gives the developer the greatest flexibility as to whether or not to proceed with the transaction, whether or not planning is granted. So that sort of flexibility can be invaluable for developers, and they often will pay an enhanced premium or money up front that's released to the landowners to incentivize them to enter into an option as opposed to a conditional deal. Because obviously with a conditional deal, once the condition is satisfied, i.e. grant of planning, free from challenge, with satisfactory conditions, then they're obliged to buy the land. And in that intervening 2-3 years, the market could have changed. The strategy of the business could have changed. There's a whole list of reasons why the developer may not want to proceed, whilst that option gives them the flexibility to choose whether or not to go ahead.
What do you think? There's a lot of talk, isn't there? There's been a lot of talk in the media around shortage of housing. What's your thoughts on that in terms of us, the house builders or the makeup of everyone building homes, that we're not quite reaching those targets? And why do you think that is? Why do you think we're not able to reach those targets? Of 300,000 homes a year, I think they're quoting that we need to build, and we're building 200,000 a year, if that.
How long have we got? So
We've got a while.
It's such a multifaceted question. I think there's so many reasons why the system is broken, and I think it is broken. I mean, you will hear Tory ministers talking about how they have delivered, as you say, circa 200,000 homes for the last few years, numbers increasing, how they've really helped to deliver the much needed housing to the country, but they haven't, and there is a massive housing shortage. Why is that? I think the planning system really doesn't help, and certainly speaking to house builder clients, there is a consistent message that the planning system is broken, both in terms of resourcing is a massive issue, as I'm sure you know at the moment.
Yeah.
Trying to get a decision through within 13 weeks is unheard of. And even getting it through within 6, 7, 8 months is a real challenge. I've got a client I was speaking to the other day, and they submitted their application in January, and they've still not had any feedback from the planning officer yet. And it's a relatively simple scheme. So that doesn't help, I would say. Do you
think, Mark, just talking about planning, because I know it's a massive issue for property developers and house builders. They've talked. The government talks about digitising the process, making it more streamlined, more automated, maybe using algorithms. All of these different ways. How much hope is there that this can be at least improved, if not, drastically improved?
I think there's real hope, actually, and what has been interesting over the pandemic, and I'm not a planning lawyer, but I do find the planning system really interesting, and I do get involved in it as part of what I do. But over the pandemic, there's been a lot of inquiries and other planning meetings that have been held online, and really successfully held online. Over the last 12, 18 months, the planning teams at the local authorities have really stepped up, and they've done a fantastic job, bearing in mind the resources that they have. And I know that developers are still really keen to keep things digitalised online, but there is some resistance to that from local authorities. And even with the planning inspectorate as well, I had a client who had an appeal decided and was successful, and it only took 6 months, which is unheard of. I mean, you go back a couple of years, and if you got a decision within 12 months, you're doing pretty well. That they were insisting on written representation, so that does speed up the process. But even so, it was a real sort of efficiency success, and definitely technology played its part in that.
What else do we think's broken? Why else do we think the system's broken? So obviously we know planning is probably a very core reason. What other reasons do you think that there's issues? Do you think there's issues, or do you think there's how to say this? If we look at house builders, do they land bank too much? Are they holding back stock to stifle supply? I think. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, there's obviously been a lot of reports into this, and the opinion. I think it was Lord Selwyn who did a report a couple of years ago. He held that there was not land banking as such, but nevertheless there was influence from house builders, how the speed at which housing was coming onto the market. But what they were saying is it was more about mix of tenure, how, as you know, a lot of the housing that's delivered in this country is by the national house builders. And quite often they're building a very similar product on their sites. So if they can diversify the tenure and the types of housing that they're delivering on the sites, then that will speed up the delivery of housing on these larger sites. And as you know, I do work in the later living sector, so I work with a number of retirement housing providers, healthcare providers as well, and that's an area that I think the system has been let down by, where the planning policies are not in place to help deliver housing for older people. And that's a really.
Do you think they're going to suffer more, Mark? Do you think the later, the retirement living age, do you think they're going to suffer more from a shortage of housing than actually, your first-time buyers or your home movers? Do you think there's more of a problem in that retirement sector, that they're not going to be looked after enough?
There's a massive problem, absolutely. And you'll see people in the industry talking about last-time buyers as opposed to first-time buyers, and how they should be incentivized to move, because it can often be, even when the housing stock is available, and it's not at the moment, even when it is, it's a huge move to downsize. So it's how you can encourage people to downsize, which frees up family homes for people to move into. So yes, it's first of all, we need to get the policies right and make it easier for the sector to build more housing. You look at where we're at compared to New Zealand, Australia, America, and in Europe as well. We're miles behind in terms of the amount of specialist housing that we're providing for older people. And there's a real crossover with social care as well. The government's been promising this white paper on social care for a number of years and has failed to deliver that. But housing can play a really important part in that. So I think that will come through the system soon. It's been promised. And actually, retirement accommodation was debated in Parliament for the first time last week or the week before. So that was a step in the right direction.
Okay.
But it's slow progress.
Where do you... can you compare us to countries like Australia and New Zealand with the fact that they've got such a vast amount of land, with smaller populations? So I suppose, is there any other comparables, maybe France, for example, where it's a smaller country, still big population, and they don't have the same issues that we have? And I wonder what the studies, if you're aware of what the studies show that they're doing differently to what we're doing differently. I know a lot of people, for example, in France actually rent instead of buy, because they don't have that buying culture as much.
Yeah.
So
I've certainly heard instances in Scandinavia and Netherlands where they've been very successful at having these multi-tenure developments where retirement housing forms part of them. So it's sort of cross-generational living. But otherwise, no, I take the point about Australia. Obviously, yeah, very different geographically. But having said that, there is still a lot of undeveloped land in this country. It's probably best not to get into too much of a debate around green belts, but affordable housing is a huge problem in this country. And recent government policy has talked about how developers are being encouraged to build high, build up. And you'll have seen locally in Bournemouth that's certainly been the case, and around our offices in Bournemouth that's been the case. But the trouble with that, of course, is it doesn't deliver affordable housing, and that falls away on viability. So that is where green belt housing or greenfield housing can deliver much needed affordable housing to communities that really need it.
Why do you think we're not building enough affordable housing? Why do property developers not want to build affordable housing? Is it just a simple commercial decision?
It comes down to economics, doesn't it? I don't think that too many house builders are in it for the good of society necessarily. And you look at the history of house building and how the percentage of properties that are built by registered providers, social housing providers, local authorities, and similar. Compare those percentages now to when they were even in the 1970s, and they're poles apart. So we are at the moment, the system is heavily reliant on the national house builders to deliver housing for the country. So that's where I think it's failed, where the local, and also local authorities and other public bodies, they own so much land and could use that land for affordable housing and similar. But quite often they will sell it for the highest value as opposed to for the greater good. So there's a sort of a mixed policy there. I saw a very interesting interview with Justin Welby when he was talking about church property and the amount of property that the church has and how they are looking to repurpose some of their
I've read about this.
For more benevolent goods, and including social housing. So there's a lot of land out there, brownfield and greenfield land, that could be used for affordable housing, and hopefully will be.
Do you think we'll see a big shift in the next sort of 5, 10, 20 years, and a lot more land will open up? It's inevitable.
It's difficult to know what might be the trigger for a real sea change in what's happened over the last 10, 15 years. I don't know if the pandemic might be a reason. It's difficult to tell. I'd like to think so. And certainly there have been government policies where they've been trying to incentivize SME house builders, smaller house builders, getting people to build their own homes. Something like that. It's going to take a lot more government intervention, I think, for us to really see a significant difference.
Talking about COVID, so as a leader as part of your organisation, how did you feel when back in March, probably now, wasn't it? When did you first hear about the pandemic? When were you guys aware of it as an organisation?
I'd say we weren't necessarily ahead of the game compared to everyone else. I think we were fairly in a fairly similar position to most, aware of it, but not necessarily fully appreciating the threat of it. So certainly, yes, we were planning during March for what we felt may have been the outcome, where we may have separate teams, where we had some people coming into the office, some people working from home, and then rotating them. And then obviously it very quickly moved in a different direction, and we were forced to house and equip over 200 people working from home. So it was.
And did everyone have the equipment and were ready to go? Because it's a challenge, isn't it, for people in that respect?
It was a massive challenge, and looking back, I think, how do we get through that at first, because it was such an uncertain time. Our IT team did a fantastic job, actually, really good, in terms of remote working, getting people the right equipment, getting it in time. So at least everyone was working on day one from home.
Yeah.
And then we could worry about upgrading the equipment as soon as it became available, and we worked out precisely what everyone needed, and where we were going to go to as well. Because at that point, of course, we didn't know how long it was going to last for. We didn't know. Well, we didn't know what was going to happen to the business, frankly. No one knew what was going to happen to the economy. Were we all going to still be, would the firm exist in 12 months? We didn't know. It was that uncertain.
How did you lead your team, and how did you help them to get through that tough period, especially that first lockdown, as you said, when no one knew what was going to happen, did they? It was such an unknown.
Communication was really important. Come back to communication, and we got acquainted with Zoom very quickly. So spending a lot of time on video calls with the team, with clients, lots of time on the phone. So it was maintaining that visibility internally and externally as well, and just working bloody hard, really. Just having to, with homeschooling as well. It was, putting in an hour before the kids got up, and then working late, and it was a real challenge. But it was a challenge for everyone. Where we did get it right, I think, was some firms I know were quite quick to make redundancies, and which we weren't. And similar to going back to the recession in 2007, 2008, again, we lost very few people then, so that when the market did recover, we were able to resource the work very quickly, and that stood us in really good stead. And we learned that lesson here as well, so that when the market did bounce back, and it didn't bounce back, as you know, and it came back really strong in certain sectors, we were able to resource that work, whilst some of our competitors were faced with more of a challenge.
Has that been that's been obviously a cultural decision, from the organisation, that we kind of protect the whole team and everyone's in it together, and we do everything we can to not just let people go if we can do it?
Definitely, yeah. I've worked at Leicester Aldridge for 21 years now, and this is my home, this is my business. I love working at the firm, and I want people to equally love working here. Most of the partners were trainees at LA, so there's a reason that they've hung around, and why I've hung around, and it's because we want it to be one of the best places to work. So we work very hard at getting that culture right, getting that communication right. So we made sure that there was real transparency across the firm during these times. Our managing partner was communicating with the staff on a regular basis, so everyone knew what we were doing, why we were doing it, and what the strategy was during lockdown.
Do you think, what's the culture of it? Do you have shared values as part of the organisation that you articulate to new team members in training, and it gets reinforced over time?
That's a really good question. We do, but I would say that over time we've had stated values. So, for example, they've been on when you open your computer, and the values are there in front of you, and we've had values that we've shared both internally and externally. We haven't always got it right, because they haven't always hung around in terms of that, that being the sort of, not strapline's the wrong word, but being something that you could really cling on to and communicate, and sort of put your finger on what it was that the firm was striving towards. So at the moment, we don't have specific stated values, but I think there are underlying values. What we have done is we've signed off on our new strategy for the firm over the next 5 years, which includes how we treat our employees and how we invest in our staff. So, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that comes. Yeah, absolutely. That's almost setting the culture, isn't it, of the business? You'll have underlying culture, which is, you know, what people are doing on a daily basis without probably even knowing what they're doing, treating people with respect,
Yes.
learning, striving to be the best, you know, all of those kinds of different things.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
absolutely, yes. I mean, culture is ultimately, yeah, sorry, Mark.
No, it's all about layers, and there's so many layers to it. So, you know, we've got a really good equality and diversity committee. We always do some really good work during Pride Week in Bournemouth.
Yeah,
Really good sharing of information, training for staff. I'm on our CSR committee as well, some corporate social responsibility.
okay. Yeah,
And I'd say probably one of my proudest moments is when I presented at our AGM a couple of years ago to the firm. So yeah, over 300 people talking
yeah,
about
yeah.
CSR and what it is we're doing, what we're hoping to do, and how everyone could play a part with that.
Yes, incredibly important. Absolutely. You know, it's really good work. Mark, how important have mentors been to you in your life, personal life, career?
That's a good question, and not one I've really thought about before. I suppose I have been mentored by people, definitely. When I first qualified, there was a partner called Bob Robertson who I worked very closely with, and eventually became his right-hand man, and eventually became his boss. And he was really
Okay.
good at. So he really helped to bring me on, and was a very good. He was very good at spending time with me, explaining things to me, giving me lots of responsibility. So that dedefinitely helped with my progression through the firm, and as a
Do you
lawyer as well.
think, looking at what you said there, I picked up on the words, you know, giving you responsibility, spending time with you. You know, I imagine that would be your advice to someone who was leading a team or starting to build up other team members within his organization. You know, do those things, spend time with them, give them, you know, help them learn, give them responsibility.
Absolutely.
Is that something that you would advise as a leader?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I've not had an office for probably about 14, 15 years now. Most of our offices are entirely open plan. I like to sit in the thick of it. I like to know what's going on. I like to hear what's happening, what people are saying on the phones, what people are doing. And as a junior lawyer, having someone close by that you can bounce ideas off, that you can overhear them on the phone, hear them talking to clients, hear them, just how they communicate to different people is really important. And it's something that we've really missed through lockdown. And we're getting back towards now, but certainly I feel for our trainees who had a real tough time of it. Trying to supervise and delegate work during the pandemic was a real challenge. So, yeah, I think you need to spend time with the junior members of staff to really help them to learn and give them the right work as well. Give them the right level and make sure that work is supervised.
Do you think, like you said, Mark, those are the guys, you know, guys and girls that have really kind of been let down by the pandemic almost with the change in kind of going to the office, working from home? Those are the guys that really needed the help that have probably suffered the most.
I think certainly it has impacted on how much they've learned. I think if I'm being honest, there's others who probably have suffered more during the pandemic, certainly within the firm and obviously outside. But yes, it has made it more of a challenge for them to get the requisite training, so that we can then sign them off to say that we we believe we've given them the correct training for them to qualify as solicitors.
What's been one of your biggest failures, Mark, and how have you learned from it as a leader?
Biggest failures. Actually, sticking on the same theme of supervision and junior lawyers, I think probably my biggest failure was when I was a junior lawyer, and I drafted some overage provisions. I didn't cover off all the what ifs, and one of the what ifs happened, which led to a dispute. And it went to court, and the client was brilliant. Actually, they stuck with us, and they won in court. But it was a real lesson. Yeah, I learned a lot from that
What
experience.
was the lesson?
Well, I think there's a few takeaways from that one. Overage is a minefield. It's a real skill to get overage right. How you deal with horrible situations such as where you make a mistake, and how you communicate with the client. So that was a lesson. But also making sure that the right person does the right type of work, and that the work is properly supervised as well. I was pretty junior at the time. So it's making sure that that as a team you're doing it right.
Absolutely. What's your just switching out the conversation slightly? What's your thoughts on what the pandemic's done to property, and in particular our high streets? Because if you look at Bournemouth, a lot of shops shut. High streets, it's a pretty depressing place these days, and I'm sure it's the same up and down the country, probably more so in other areas as well. How do you feel about that, and what do you think can be done to improve? Because I read a really good article on LinkedIn that you did around the school, which is just around the corner from your office, and the infrastructure challenges. So it kind of made me thinking about office retail and what can happen.
I mean that article was that was around a school that's been built just in central Bournemouth. The reference to infrastructure there was more about our lovely roads in Bournemouth, and how easy it is to get around in peak times. And don't get me started on the roads. But in terms of the high street, I think the high street was failing before the pandemic. Obviously, it's accelerated so fast with online shopping, online retail. It's been incredible. So it seems to be more about the experience for consumers now. So there's still thriving retail outlets, but it's not the traditional high street. So we need to think about what can we use that space for. And Bournemouth is a really good example of where you've got a third of the shops boarded up, maybe, if depending on which bit of town you're going through.
Absolutely.
So we need to think about what do we want there, and there are shops that I think local businesses, people with trades, that people would appreciate having, where they, depending on who's accessing them. But I think a lot of towns, the towns that really thrive, where you've got the butchers, you've got certain shops and stores that the community wants of a certain standard. With Bournemouth, it's a slightly different community because of the reliance on tourism. But I can see, coming back to retirement housing, I can see how retirement accommodation can play a real part in how you can rejuvenate the high street. There's a developer called Guild Living that's got a lot of investment at the moment. They've just got a consent in Walton-on-Thames for 300 odd units. and that was quite an interesting one because it got refused at local level, and essentially got refused because the council said that they were concerned that by having more older people in the town centre would be detrimental to the community, or worse to that effect.
Okay.
And it was overturned on appeal.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty clear that if you've got a significant number of older people who can walk into town, then they will be using those facilities, and they will be spending their money.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
and it, I think it's a perfect location for them. So I think their specialist housing will play a part. I think we will see more housing intertwined with retail and leisure uses. More flexibility is required, I think. But also we need to think more strategically as well. And you look at Poole and it's obviously you have that sort of juxtaposition of Sandbanks and then the Poole town centre, which is quite tired in places. So how can we look at this more strategically, and how can we invest and make it a thriving place to live again?
Definitely, it's really interesting. What you're saying about retirement. Just obviously later living, going into the town centres. It sounds very logical and something that could really be utilised, because I think sometimes it's easy to just think town centre living is for young people. I think that's what a lot of people think when they think if we're going to build something. I think as well with Bournemouth and the way Bournemouth is, although it's we've got a big retirement community here, which is fantastic. You've also got that kind of cultural seaside town mentality with bars and clubs and that stuff. So it's kind of a bit of a mixed bag, isn't it? So it's just getting that balance right, I imagine.
It is, yeah. I mean, Bournemouth's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we've now got 2 universities. And you go back 20 years, and there was very much a reputation of it being a place where you used to just go to retire. But now it's it's a thriving economy. Bournemouth University is done fantastically, and the arts school as well as the arts college. So it's a really interesting mix. And where our offices are in the town centre, we're in the business community, the business district, and surrounded by student accommodation. So in some places 16 stories.
Big influx,
so the town planners believe that use is that's the use for the business district. As to what its shelf life is, I don't know. I'm not sure it's a long-term solution.
We will see. Only time will tell.
Yeah.
What's the one common myth, Mark, about your profession that you might like to debunk?
I don't know. Maybe you're probably better placed to tell me what the myths are, to be honest, or what the what people think. But I suppose I don't know if this is true or not. But you can tell me. I think some people think that when they speak to their lawyer, the clock is ticking every second you ring your lawyer, or if you meet with your lawyer, so that you're going to be hit with a massive bill every time you speak to your lawyer, which is not the case. And I always encourage our clients to involve us in transactions at as early a stage as possible to help us, so we can help them to shape the transaction based on our experience. But yes, we won't and don't always charge for every conversation we have.
Absolutely. It's good to hear. Very good to hear. What's the, if you could step into my shoes, who would you like to interview, Mark? Within the property industry. Could be any sector.
So, yes, I was thinking then, who are my ideal dinner guests? But that's none of them in the property industry, it's fair to say. I suppose that the one person who I would say that there's a QC called Christopher Young, who is a top planning barrister in the UK, and fairly early on in lockdown, there's 4 barristers started a podcast a weekly show
Okay.
called "Have We Got Planning News for You?" And that was there's a chap called John
I
Madams.
like the play on words.
Yeah, a chap called John who was at McCarthy and Stone at the time and put me onto it.
Yeah.
And they would just get together every week and just talk about planning matters and what was happening in planning law. And it's been hugely successful, and the four of them are brilliant, and they have some really good guests on it each week. There's been Judge Rinder has been on. The Archbishop of Canterbury's been on. You know, they've had some really high-profile guests, really interesting people, and they're still going now. And you know, I'm not a planning lawyer, as I said, but I do find it fascinating. Yeah, my father-in-law he's an ex-head of planning at a local authority, so we have very sad conversations around SIL when we see each other. But yes, I would say Christopher Young, who he's not particularly old, and he seems very normal, which you wouldn't expect when you hear QC. You'd think that, you know, someone very stuffy.
Yeah.
No, it just comes across as an interesting, nice, normal person. So yeah, that's who I'd say.
Fantastic. No, I'll definitely look him up. That's good to, you know, and the podcast sounds really interesting as well. So I'm sure some of the listeners who are interested, you know, if you're in property development or, you know, it's always good to be aware of exactly what's happening in planning. Absolutely. What are the three most important skills, Mark, that you think a leader requires to be successful in property? I know you touched on communication.
Yes. I would say that the main one is around your ability to assess risk. I've given training to a few house builders in the past, and I talk quite a lot around risk assessment and how at each stage of the development process, what the land guys are doing, what the development guys are doing, they're assessing risk, and the lawyers equally, when they're advising them, they are helping them to evaluate the risk. So it's identifying the risk, evaluating it, and working out if that risk is at an acceptable level. As you know, no development is risk-free, but it's all about understanding the risk, what it actually means, and is it a risk that you can proceed with. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, is availability. Is that a skill? I think it probably is a skill. Being available.
Absolutely.
So I think you need to be responsive to clients and to other people on a transaction. You need to be available, or more contactable, really. I think people want to do business with people that they can get hold of and that are available at sensible times. You know, it's not about being there at midnight every night to answer questions, but it's making sure that your people know, you know, where you are, what you're doing, and getting back to people within a reasonable time. Too often, as you know, you deal with people that are really hard to get hold of, and when someone's off the radar for a week or two, it can the impact on a transaction can be fatal. So you need to be responsive. And number three, I would say, is commerciality. Again, I'm not sure that's a skill necessarily, but I talked a bit about this before, but it's about good lawyers that they get to know their client. They really get under the bonnet, and they find out what makes their client tick, and really think about a transaction. And also they have a genuine interest in the sector that they're advising in. So my advice to people starting out would be to make sure that you really do take the time to get to know your clients, and also any sector that you want to be part of. The sweet spot for lawyers is really becoming a trusted advisor to your clients, and you're only going to do that if you really put the hard work in to really get to know them and their business.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Great answers. Mark, how can any of our listeners connect with you? I know you do a lot on LinkedIn. So could you tell our listeners how they can connect with you if they would like to ask any advice? I'm sure you'd be happy to help them.
Absolutely. LinkedIn is a good place to get a hold of me. Yeah, I do enjoy going on LinkedIn and posting blogs and articles. You can get my details on our website, leicesteraldridge.com. Yeah, be delighted to hear from any of your listeners.
Sounds good. Mark, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And yeah, take care.
Pleasure,
Thanks
Tim.
now.
Thank you. Cheers.
If you like this video, then please check out the video on the screen right now. And please don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more content from property leaders. And please remember to comment on the video below. Thank you.